and that's balance between a lot of things in life. It's personal spiritual reflection. It's time with family and friends. It is a balance, with work and life. It's a balance between our own ego and our own sense of spiritual call.
Yes.
Making sure those things aren't way out of whack. It's balance within our own emotions and our physical health. It's balance with who we spend time with.
Right there, it would have been a nice time for it to drop right here.
We can do this here, watch me rock the flow. Killing it a must, never option, no.
Spent guys at the crab table, still ain't signed to a rap label. DVD when I ain't have cable. I got balls, he ain't rap able. A 6D for me is man fatal. Can't see me like a bad angle.
Absolutely, ain't going nowhere. You will be forever, and ever and ever.
Peace, beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know Thyself. I'm going to say show, not podcast. The Know Thyself show utilizes the metaphor of the shelf in order to extrapolate the self. And the way we do that is we invite guests to share something about themselves. And before I introduce my guests, I'm going to invite all of you to check out the website, www.knowthyself.tv, and that is where you can find opportunities for home coaching. If you have kids between the ages of 4 and 14, I do home coaching. If you want to get a copy of my book, Beyond the Four Walls, The Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop, with hip hop being 50 now, people are asking, what is the big deal? If you want to know, read the book. If you're looking for workshops, anything related to bullying or social media or the theology of hip hop, yes, that. Definitely check out the website where you can find all that good stuff there. The next thing we like to do is I like to shout out a group of individuals. And today I would like to give a big shout out to all of my lay ministers. Because I remember Father Ugo once told me, Walter, you don't need to wear the collar to do God's work. Oh, how simple yet profound. I want to give a shout out to all of my activists. Because like I always say, what is an activist? Activist, someone who activates the community, right? And I want to give a shout out to all of my organizers. Because godly, that is a tough job. I've dipped and dabbed in it, and it's not for the weak-minded or hearted, because I got somebody here that I respect, that I admire, that I love, that I've known for quite some time, and I am so proud of. My brother from another, David Fraccaro. What's up?
Hey, buddy. Thanks a lot for having me.
It is an honor. I'm so grateful. It's been quite some time, but thank God for this thing called the internet. With all its pros and cons, I would definitely say this is one pro, that I get to reconnect with family, because you and I have an interesting history. But before I get into that, have you ever seen the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures?
Sure. I think I had significant parts of it memorized in junior high, and just recently showed it now twice to my 10-year-old son. So,
oh, nice. And obviously
it's aged pretty well.
Oh, for
some
sure.
parts, but for the most parts, it's transcended its time. It's a great film. Go ahead, please.
Yes, no, and the reason I say is because, as you know, Bill and Ted get into this like a phone booth or elevator or something like that, and they travel back in time. So what we want to do is travel back in time to a younger David. If we were to travel back in time, what would we see? What would we smell? What would we hear? Because you are originally from?
Midwest, small town Midwest.
Midwest? We're here.
Yeah. So Northern Illinois, Southern Indiana, fishing on the Ohio River, performing in musicals like Oklahoma and The Music Man, very little racial or cultural or religious diversity. But grew up with a family and especially a father who really taught me the value of what I've kind of come to understand as kind of the value or the theology of unlikely friendships. That God and profound truth is often to be found through those who are, at least on the surface, very different from you in culture, in race, in faith, in nationality. And he would oftentimes show me those kind of unlikely friendship movies, Shawshank Redemption, Midnight Cowboy, even The Karate Kid, Brian's Song, movies that really at their core were about the power of unlikely friendships to change and transform people. And so I kind of took that as a way to say I'm ready to get out into the world. So I went to school in Miami, Florida. And did a theater degree there, and then moved to New York City, to Queens, the most diverse kind of neighborhood in the entire world, according to the United Nations. And really immersed myself in a lot of different traditions, in a lot of different foods, in a lot of different languages, and thrived amidst that diversity. I loved it, and that's kind of guided me through a lot of my journey. But moved there to be kind of an actor, and like a lot of young actors, when it's good, it's good, but when it's not so good, you're moving between apartments and you're carrying your mattress through Queens, and you don't have health insurance. And
why is it that we've all gone through that one? The mattress, man. I can't tell you.
I think I lived in like 8 different apartments in Queens early on, and had a lot of great experiences. The theater was really taught me to come out of my shell, taught me the value of kind of walking in another human being's shoes, and not just doing that as an intellectual exercise, but actually playing different characters, and getting to know what their emotions might be inside of their skin, and just the people within the theater oftentimes were so free and exciting and full of passion, and we were taught to experiment and living with those people for 3-4 months at a time in another city or in New York, and was just so exciting. But my life kind of took a left turn unexpectedly after witnessing 9/11. I was actually at an audition that morning. Saw the towers fall, and started going to church, the Riverside Church on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Oh, shout out to the Riverside. Yep, I spent some time there. Yep.
And while the church was incredible, the preaching from James Forbes, who was like, honestly, like watching a brilliant surfer. I mean, he would
legend
catch a wave of the Holy Spirit, and you're like, holy cow! I just was so taken with his preaching. But it was actually a small ministry of the church to go visit immigrants in detention centers post 9/11 that really ultimately changed my path in life significantly, and led me to where I am today. And so I'm always deeply grateful for the small, tiny little ministries of churches that are doing life-changing work, so that it was called Sojourners Visitation Ministry, and it was really when, after 9/11, when immigration and national security kind of got wed together, and the detention of immigrants was nothing new. I mean, that's been happening, sadly, for centuries, but modern detention had been going on for a few years prior to 9/11, but it really exploded, sadly, since.
We were just talking about the service that you do mentoring and coaching of kids. Tell us about that.
So the coaching piece, as somebody that has been coached, I wanted to give back and coach. I've been coaching for like 20 years. I work with an organization called the Elite Method, where we provide in-house coaching to young people between the ages of 4 and 14. It's like Big Brother meets a private coach. So we like to integrate social-emotional development with physical skills.
You help build up their confidence, help them find some things they're good at.
I'm not trying to knock on social media, but we are in the digital age, man. You know, bullying, all-time high.
Yeah.
Suicide, all-time high.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Everybody want to compare to each other instead of empowering. I'm coming at a young person like, yo, I see you because you're a reflection of the divine. So I'm going to treat you as such.
You know, Dave, I know one way that you and I are indirectly connected, and you mentioned this, aside from the Riverside Church, and shout out to the Riverside Church. I was working under the leadership of Reverend J. Lee Hill at the time. Do you know Reverend Lee?
I do. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, he's now in, I think he's still in California. But that is Union Theological Seminary. I always tell people the Walter before Union and after Union are two completely different people. And the more I speak to my Union friends and colleagues, they kind of connect and can relate to that. Now, of course, it's different because depending on where you are in life, in general, when going back to school, whatever it is, your perspective and view it could be different. So, I went in there, I was in like my mid-20s, and versus somebody that went in their mid-50s, because there was such diversity in age and otherwise. What drew you to Union, and how has Union impacted you and the work that you do today?
It's a funny story, actually. After visiting detained immigrants in detention centers in New York, something I did kind of every Saturday for 7 or 8 years, I decided that I wanted to try seminary out. And I was inspired by going and listening to Cornel West speak around different venues.
Shout out to Dr. West, who's running for office.
Had never heard anybody speak with such brilliance and eloquence, and to weave the lessons of history from the last 2,000 or 3,000 years into what's going on today. And it was just so full of passion and insight. And so I actually, I don't think I'd have the guts to do this now, but I called his secretary. He was at Princeton at the time. I was like, I need to get lunch with that guy because I'm thinking about going to seminary and I want to get some advice about where to go to seminary. Not most people are going to be trying to get lunch with Cornel West to figure out where they should go to seminary. But after 6 months, he finally gave me some time. And so I went into his office, and had a really great conversation with him. And he had, recommended Union, and I was all set to actually head down to Georgia, to Columbia instead, but ended up going to Union and thought, I had been in New York for about 5 years at that point, and thought it could be cool to stay another 5. And so he was a big part of the reason I went.
Shout out to Dr. West, man, and because of that, another one direct connection we have with all of this, because it's all part of the web, was me meeting you in Switzerland for the Ecumenical Water Network. We've talked about this, and every time climate change, crisis, water, anything related to Mother Earth comes up, I always make the connection with our time in Switzerland, because it was the first time that young Christians, I believe under 30, gathered from all over the world to discuss everything and anything to do with the water realities in their respective countries. And those 2 weeks, the people that I've met and continue to stay, many of them in contact with till this day, that was back in 2000, I want to say 8 or 7. And till this day, I'm getting goosebumps because it was one of the most impactful experiences in my life. Talk to us about that, because I know you were very much involved on a leadership role and organizing role, to help in the development of bringing these 30 young people together, who, it reminds me so much of the documentary The Letter that came out from Pope Francis, where people from the diaspora all over the world came, they wrote a letter to the Pope talking about their existential realities as it relates to their country and climate change. So you had people from indigenous person from Brazil come, you had someone come in from South Africa, and I'm thinking like, wow, that reminds me of us, where we just flying to, we don't know what's going to happen and what to expect, but here we go, and we leave out smiling and crying and laughing, and I can go on and on. Talk to us about that, David.
Yeah. So while, education there through folks like, Dr. Cohn and Gary Dorian and
rest in peace,
and
Dr. Cohn. Yep.
Yeah. I was really always never a great student. I was too interested in what was going on, outside of the windows of the institution. And taking advantage of some other opportunities that came through seminary. So one of those opportunities for me was being able to represent my denomination, the United Church of Christ at the United Nations, and the education that I got just going to all kinds of forums at the United Nations. It just really opened up my understandings of international relations and issues in other part of the countries, and the ways in which NGOs played a role in helping to shape international policy and make some things happen. And I was very, very curious about what does it look like for, what's the role of religion in all this, and what would it look like for, as you think of Christianity like a tree, you have the initial teachings of Jesus and the roots of the Jewish tradition prior to that. But then over time, you get all these different branches of Christianity that are going to spread throughout the world. And some of those branches communicate beautifully with one another, and others just, you can't even recognize that you're part of the same tree anymore. But I was really interested for, some of those branches who maybe never talked to one another, the ways in which they could perhaps come together, recognizing some of their differences around the faith, but some of their shared values around some of the basic Christian tenets, loving your neighbor as yourself, and many others. And so the ways in which we could bond over those shared values as Christians from around the world to really help resolve a lot of the conflicts and issues globally was just a very appealing idea to me. And so I was able to also get work through the World Council of Churches and some of the young adult ecumenical formation work to kind of connect a lot of different Christian young adults across the world. And so part of where we met was at this water forum in Switzerland, where we brought, these 30 young people from all over the world who cared about issues related to water, recognizing just how sacred water is to our tradition. And if you read the Bible, you'll get a sense for just how many times water is mentioned and the sacredness of water, and we still use it as a symbol within our tradition today, with baptism and many other ways.
And I think, David, the water is mentioned like 800 times in the Bible, something along those lines.
Yeah. And recognizing, this was 15 years ago, that if we're not careful, that water's going to run out, and already was running out, and will continue to run out, potable drinking water, and the ways in which that's going to push people to cross borders, the ways it's going to create conflict between different tribes and nations. And we're already certainly seeing that right now. And so it was really saying, how could we gain a new sense of respect for water and conserve water and to treat it with the respect it deserves and that our faith calls for. And so, it was just bringing together those traditions from those different young Christians from Africa and Central and South America and New York and Western and Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia to bring us all together. And we all brought a little sample of water from our traditions. And I actually have this sitting on my shelf, which is, again, waters from lakes and streams from 30 different nations from those young folks. But having us come together, and you're right, it was the relationships that really made that so special. We got along, beautifully, and we listened to one another's stories, and we cried, and we danced, and we shared some beers in Switzerland, and just really bonded. And I when I think back about kind of a multicultural experience on an issue I cared about, that's in my top three probably. It was a beautiful experience, and I miss a lot of those people and care a great deal about them. We'll work now around water issues and other issues in other parts of the world, and I'm very proud of them.
And I think of how the issue of water has exacerbated throughout the years because of things like, with the work that I do with the Marino Fathers and Brothers, shout out. We talk a lot about Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, care for our common home, where it's this calling, or Amazonia, the other encyclical about our Amazonian brothers and sisters in the Amazon rainforest in South America. How, I think of the book Water Wars, right? Like, it's a call, it's just, it's interesting how many times water is mentioned in Holy Scriptures, how much water is inside of us, how much water is, contained in our earth, more than anything else. And here we are again, still speaking on this particular issue today, of the concerns, the privatization of water, about water misuse, fracking and the effects of that with water. And it's all into, the lead that's being found in water in places like Flint, Michigan. Everything is a web of, like, if you don't know, you better know. And I appreciate it, specifically, that call to action, that invitation, because I think one thing I always tell people, the worst thing you can do in this life is know and not do nothing. Yeah. Like, I think it's going to sit with you on the deathbed. You feel me? You're going to say something, David? Yeah.
No, scientifically we know that a key ingredient for life is water. It just doesn't exist without it. But we've gotten so used to, in the United States, being able to turn on a tap and we brush our teeth and keep it running, and we just don't. We've gotten into a habit of not really valuing it and understanding how crucial it is to our survival individually and as a human species. But I just had a chance during seminary to travel to Bolivia and met some. Yes. Some Episcopalian missionaries there, and went with them to very rural parts of Bolivia. And in this particular case, the individual I was with was a water engineer, and walked the mountains trying to find the sources of springs within mountains, and whether or not there could be some real basic piping that could travel 2-3 miles into a village and not have people have to walk for that water, and seeing how sick people were getting on that journey, or not using water from the original source, and just seeing the ways in which that missionary worked beautifully with the local community to establish that water, and being with them on the walk, and the day that they said, yes, this is going to be doable, and they started some of the breaking of the ground and the celebration around that, and the ways in which and the spiritual feeling of gratitude for that spring being identified on the side of the mountain, and the ways in which they felt a spiritual connection to it. Just felt it felt so raw and beautiful, and it gave me a much greater sense for what it looks like to truly value water. But we're just so kind of separated from that experience in most parts of the United States. And we've talked about this before, but people don't really care about a whole host of issues, including environmental issues and water rights and conservation, until it becomes personal. And it's when we all of a sudden lack water or clean water. It's when we travel into the mountains and recognize how sacred and beautiful it is to find it and to treat it with the respect it deserves, that people really change. And so I'm grateful to have had those kind of experiences with you in Switzerland, to learn about the issue, and to be in places like Bolivia and Kenya to work on some water projects and see how valuable it was to people.
Yeah, and an event that was just unprecedented for its time, and just still I revert to it, and I think it was a very sacred time and moment for us to gather in that space, and I'm so grateful for it. You shared one thing from your shelf. Is that what's coming out of your shelf today, David?
No, I had both that and this on my shelf for 20. And I'd mentioned visiting folks inside of detention, and this I actually have two of them, and One comes from a young Colombian woman who was 18 years old, who had fled violence in the rural hills of Colombia during really difficult times in the early 2000s. This came from a Tibetan woman fleeing Chinese religious persecution. His family had been killed, and both committed no crime other than not having the right documents when they arrived at the airport, and were put in chains and sent to a massive detention facility right on the outskirts of Newark and JFK airports. Little to no medical or physical, health care. If they complained, they were put in the SHU, or what's called solitary confinement. Lights were on 24/7, freezing conditions, and nobody knew they were inside. And this was 2 people out of thousands in 250 detention centers across the nation that again exploded post 9/11. And these places still exist today. The vast majority have committed no real crimes other than not having the right papers. And they were in there for not just months, but in some cases years, and they weren't allowed outside. And the only fresh air they smelled or saw was a little, sliding window at the top of the break room that they were in for a short period of time. And so and when we visited them, there was a bulletproof glass. There was a little barbed wire hole that we would speak through. And as I said, going once turned into going every week for 7-8 years. And again, the issue became personal because I cared deeply about the people inside. Not the same faith, not the same culture, not the same language, but it was that unlikely friendship piece that I told you about. We ended up learning to a little bit of one another's languages and would hold up pictures to the glass. And they sent these to me on my birthday when I was in seminary. And seminary was not the easiest time in my life for me. And at times, felt lonely there. And so to get things like this from people,
I agree. I know what you mean, David. I know what you mean. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
And to get this kind of color and genius and beauty from some of the most resilient and courageous people I've ever met out of one of America's darkest corners is such a symbol to me. And unfortunately, some were sent back. And others, with the help of lawyers that we were able to find for them, were able to stay. And so some of the stories had a happy ending. Some I don't know quite what happened, but I will never forget the resilient and courageous spirit of the folks inside who, even though they were not of my same faith, they taught me what it means to love my neighbor as myself, and they made me take my own faith more seriously. And they're the ones that really ended up sending me to seminary and to get additional degree in human rights. And really, for the last 20 years, I've been working at the intersect of immigration and faith because of these folks. And so that's what's still on my shelf today, and will be there until the day I die.
That's beautiful. And wow, because Tupac said that out of these concrete jungles, a flower is bloomed from the cracks. Despite all the madness of gangs and drugs, there's still beauty in there. And the fact that flowers were sent to you, wow. And I wanted to ask you, David, because you work heavily with migrants. We know currently, and unfortunately, probably by the time this comes out too, we'll still be confronting challenges of internal and international migrations. And a lot of it, sociologists, they call the push and pull theories. People are pulled for good reasons to get higher education or for family, but others, in this case, and these examples, are pushed because of violence and crime and climate change. But I wanted to ask you, somebody here is a migrant. Somebody here is an asylum seeker. Somebody here is going through this right now who's probably going to listen to this. What would you say to him or her?
One, that you're amazing. That I'm sorry for any traumatizing violence or poverty that you fled, and my guess is this was not an easy trip, but you made it here, and you're amazing. And there are people here who care about you, who may not know you, but recognize that you have a name, you have a face, you have a story, and see the resilient spirit within you, and want to be of help. And help is going to be complicated, but let's start with the beginnings. Do you have a place to stay? Do you have food? Do you have clothes? Let's get those things, taken care of. Do you have other family you need to call? Do you have other family here with you? Let's get those basic needs met first. And there are places to go to. There are nonprofits. There are faith communities. There are churches, mosques, temples that can help you get those things. Do you have a place to lay your head? If not, we're going to do our best to help you find that place. Because, until you get those basic needs met, it's really difficult to move forward with some other things. After that, we'll be, as soon as humanly possible, trying to find an affordable attorney. And that's a key part here. Is there are so many people who have limited or no status in this country, and there are limited a number of pro bono or affordable good immigration attorneys. So finding one that can do this for low cost or for free is going to be difficult, but there are people out there that might be willing to fit the bill to help you find an attorney, and walk you through what possibilities you might have in your immigration case to stay here. And help try to make what you want possible, and also to help you understand and know what your rights are, and how to be careful and mindful here, and to surround yourself with people who are going to respect you and love you and walk with you through this journey.
Yeah.
And there's a network of those places across the United States, and we're going to help you on that journey, make your dreams come true as best as we can. We can't promise anything, because this system is complex, and life is full of unknowns, but we're going to walk with you on the journey.
Yeah, I love that. I echo that, and probably to sum it up with everything you said, whoever's listening, you are not alone, because that's the biggest thing in this world. Speaking of seminary, how we felt lonely, right? Like that really, a lot of memories started to come up with that, and I appreciate you saying that, David. One thing that you've been mentioning over and over a lot, particularly when it comes to unlikely friendships, is the art of storytelling. You are a storytelling coach. I've never heard that. I coach too. I've also done like career coaching, spiritual coaching, like sports coaching. I've never heard of storytelling coaching. I love that. What is a storytelling coach?
Yeah, well, I was an executive director of a nonprofit, again, that served immigrants on a daily basis from all over the world in North Carolina, and then recently, a couple of years ago, moved to be closer to family in Northern Illinois, back towards kind of where I initially, grew up. And one of the things I really wanted to do was combine, my passion and knowledge and skill in acting from years ago with the knowledge and experience in nonprofit work, and bring those two worlds together. And it really came out of seeing that there were a lot of nonprofits who were doing amazing, life-saving, life-changing work, but were getting very little support because they maybe hadn't thought of or really learned how to effectively tell the story of their work. What need are they filling? Why is it particularly important to them? Why should the rest of us care? And why is it especially urgent now that we help them in what they're doing? And I also saw some nonprofits that were actually not, that had these $1 million budgets that were not making that great of an impact in the world, but learn to tell their story. And we're putting thousands of dollars into these creative videos and telling these gut-wrenching stories, and did it in a really polished way. And we're getting all kinds of support, and yet we're making very little impact. And so there was this massive imbalance. And so I was really interested in helping those nonprofits, as well as small businesses and certain faith communities and maybe underfunded schools, help tell their stories, so that they could gain the kind of support that they deserved. And so it really is about making sure you tell it in a way that brings out why it's meaningful and to you, but also about why other people should care, who maybe don't know what you're doing, for whom your work is not personal yet, but it could be through the telling of your story, and why especially it's urgent and important right now.
Yes.
When this kind of three ingredients, are there in a story, that it begins to pop a little bit. And so I love not only helping people craft that story, and we could tell that story, you could turn it into like a 20-30 minute story, but how do you, like a piece of meat, carving off the fat of it, how do you get to the meat of the story and turn it into kind of a 3 to 5 minute pitch? Right.
What they call it, the elevator pitch, but your storytelling pitch.
Yeah. So how to both write that effectively in a way that's meaningful and authentic to you. You don't have to be charismatic when you tell it, but people gotta feel that it's meaningful to you in your own authentic way. But also then how to tell it, so your story's imbued with some passion. And so that's really where the acting stuff comes back in. I'll have people repeat certain words or phrases over and over again until they kind of drop the presentation, and until those words that they're saying start to spark memories, it starts to hit their heart, and it starts to become very authentic and sincere. And I've just found that to be incredibly meaningful and rewarding work, that again kind of fuses my pre-seminary acting work with my post-seminary human rights and nonprofit migration work, and so that's been really, really meaningful.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that. As we kind of get into the latter end of this, you're an actor, you are a theologian, you're a world traveler, you're a migrant activist. That's how I see you, and you're a father. I asked my guests this, somebody is going to be a future David in the making for Fraccaro. Somebody out there. It may not be exactly your footsteps, but they're up and coming. It's another generation. What's one piece of advice you would give, particularly to that young person who's kind of following your path?
As you said, nobody's going to follow my exact path. We all have unique stories. But I think the biggest thing I would say is to find balance in life.
Yeah. Yin yang.
We really start to get out of harmony with ourselves and with the world. And that's when we find ourselves acting and saying things and emoting in ways in which we wouldn't usually, when we're kind of really out of balance in our lives.
Oh, speak on it. Speak on that, David. It's like if your mind is so clouded, you can't see the end of the tunnel. It's just so clouded. Yeah.
Well, and that's balance between a lot of things in life. It's personal spiritual reflection. It's time with family and friends. It is a balance, with work and life. It's a balance between our own ego and our own sense of spiritual call.
Yes.
Making sure those things aren't way out of whack. It's balance within our own emotions and our physical health. It's balance with who we spend time with. So,
yes.
I'm a big believer of not just isolating ourselves with a choir of people that just agree with us on everything, but making sure we got a good balance with those we don't know or care about or agree with. So it's balance in a whole lot of ways in life, and I think it's when enough people in this world are have a sense of peace and balance within themselves that you start to hear a little bit of harmony in the world again. But right now we are just there's just so much discord in the world, and I think a lot of that can be traced back to a lack of balance and peace within ourselves. And for me, that's a really good merging of kind of Christianity and Buddhism in that regard, and where they really can be helpful to one another. But so yeah, and I remember my father saying that to me one time as well. Find balance in life, and I didn't quite understand what he meant when I was in my early teens, and I think I have a better sense of that now, and something I hope to share with my son. And balance looks differently on everybody's own story, but I hope that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. And it's, take it as you will, family, what you're listening to, because balance. I remember when I first started ministry, going back to the Riverside Church and Reverend Lee, the first day when he had his team, it was like 4 of us. And he drew a circle. He asked us to draw a circle and, divide that circle into multiple pieces, like a pie, right? One of those slices of pies is your spirituality. One is your family. One is your physical health, your psychological health, your personal, intimate relationship. And he says, color as much as you think you're kind of holding down each slice. The more it's colored in, the more you're balanced. But if your spirituality is up here, but your relationship with your wife or whatever is down here, imbalance. Yep. If you're more focused on your ministry, but you're taken away from your going to the gym or doing some physical health, imbalance. And he says, the more you try to keep balanced, this pizza, this slice, the more this thing is not going to be easy, because it never is going to be easy.
No.
You're going to flow a little bit better. And I'll never forget that, David.
That's cool, Walter, that all these years later that you're able to remember that, because that's very profound. And the fact that we're lifting up Jay Lee is really cool. And, I also sometimes think as Christians, I kind of look at the cross that way, that I look at the cross as the 2 most important commandments: love God, and this is this unique relationship, a spiritual relationship between our human selves and God. And then it's love our neighbors as ourselves, which is much more horizontal. And I think it's really important as Christians that we also have a good balance between those two things, kind of draw a circle around the cross in that regard. And I think that's something worth really striving for. But I would argue in a lot of Christian communities, you feel that imbalance, every day. And I can feel that imbalance in myself sometimes too. I got so wrapped up in, especially going to Union and having that kind of young outrage at the detention systems. It was very much Christianity through the lens of the loving my neighbors, myself, and social justice. But I found that I was really dry on the very personal, spiritual me and God journey, and I'm trying to pay a little bit more attention and to make sure that well is not too dry, and that those 2 parts really inform one another. And I would say that what I've learned in that personal relationship between me and God is that God doesn't just want me hanging out with the choir all the time of social justice activists. It's part of the reason I'm currently also a minister of a small, rural, pretty theologically and politically conservative congregation. I think it was really important for me to walk with them in their journey, and to find a way to love each other despite our differences, and to take a walk together, in Christian legitimate love, and learn from one another and be transformed together. And we have, and it's been remarkable. And I'm grateful for that I wasn't so blinded by social justice and the tendency to want to just group up with our own choir and demonize another side. I was really grateful that I kind of had a awakening to say I really need to be walking with that other side as well, and to give grace and to ask for grace. And I don't feel there's any other way forward in this nation without that at this time. So it's been really valuable to be with the congregation I'm at now.
David, if somebody wants to connect with you, collaborate with you in this spiritual war, if they want to connect with you, how do people, if they want to reach and collaborate with you, what's any social media, contact, website, all that good stuff?
Just davidfraccaro.com, DAVIDFRACCARO.com would be a great place to go. I'm not really great with self-promotion, and as I get back to that balance of making sure
that's right.
Call does not get too connected in with my ego. So there's not a ton out there, but I'm up for just for anything if I happen to strike a chord with anybody, and to learn from others. And I do want to say, Walter, after watching your show many times, you do a really wonderful job of lifting up people and stories who may not be on the cover of magazines, or may not have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, but are doing remarkable work in their own corner of the nation or of the world, who deserve to be amplified. And you do a really wonderful job of listening to people, because you deserve to be amplified as well. You have you're incredibly smart, passionate, accomplished guy, but you really take time to try to amplify and lift up others. And for me, there's a lot of character in that. And it occurred to me in listening to some of your podcasts, whether 2 people listen to this or 20,000, these are going to continue and be kind of like books on a shelf. And so for people who do love you, including your children, it's going to be really interesting for them to watch this, because it's going to be like, these are the life books that Dad read or invested in, or these were the lives that interested him, and these are the conversations and things he wanted to pull out and learn from them, and that he thought were going to be valuable in some way to the world. And that's really worthwhile and lovely. I know this is not the only thing you do, but I think it's noble, and it's great, and deserves to be said and appreciated.
My brother David, I'm honored. I'm humble. I love you. Thank you for those words. It's just, I tell people, this is absolutely nothing to do with me. It's all, but everything to do with us. And I told myself, I don't want to highlight artists or million followers. That's cool, and that has its space and place. But I can give 2 F's about how much money you have, how much accolades you have. I'm really trying to see your soul, and I see your soul, brother. And it's interesting, as we wrap up, Nori of the Drink Champs podcast, shout out Nori. He always gives flowers. He says, we like to give flowers to people while they're still alive. And it just so happens that you have flowers in your shelf that you share for us today. So I want to give you your flowers, your dandelions, your tulips, your roses, because I see what you do. I see your heart. I know the divine sees it. And that's all that matters. And we are very grateful that you exist in this world, my brother. So thank you for your time. And as we always do, we end with a quote. And this comes to us from Joe Sabah. And it reads as such. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. Peace, family.
Thanks, Walter.
Mixtaper.